Well, it actually now just popped up and said now streaming live on YouTube.
All right.
Now it's doing it. I don't know what its issue was. I just did the exact same thing and it's working. So forget it. Disregard. It's setting up.
Okay.
Probably.
It wanted to save me from answering a legal question.
There you go. Are we live?
You're live.
All right.
About
I
a
would like-
2-minute lag.
That's fine. I'm okay with lag since they can't participate anyways. It's a workshop. I would like to call the May 11th, 2020 Town Board Workshop meeting to order. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Here.
Councilmember Stafford,
Here.
Councilmember Safranek,
Here.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Here.
Supervisor Schultz.
Here. So this coming Wednesday, we will have 4 special permits. 2 are for Mission Barbecue, 1 for Apex Rochester, and 1 for Goodwill of the Finger Lakes. There are no public hearings. However, there is 1 public presentation for the Antoinette Brown Blackwell Scholarship winners. We're going to start this workshop meeting with a presentation from Raymond Wagner, CPA, with respect to the audit reports for the town. Ray, are you on?
Yep, I'm here. This is Tom Zuber, one of the partners. I'm
Okay.
in charge of the Henrietta audit. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, we can.
All right. Steve, I believe everybody should have received a handout. I can share my screen as well if that works out for everybody.
Yeah, let's do that. I think that would be helpful for us.
All right. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Yep. So my name's Tom Zuber, one of the partners with the firm. I've been with Ray for over 25 years. In fact, I think just hit 26th year. And, you know, we've completed the financial statement for the town of Henrietta. And you should have received copies of the full audit report. It's a 60-page report. There's a lot of very good information in the report. We issued an unqualified opinion, no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. That's really the opinion you're looking for. That suggests the financial statements are presented fairly. There are a couple unique items in the financial statements because the town did implement some new reporting requirements. As we go through the executive summary, I'll highlight a few of those items. But overall, the town continues to be in good financial condition. Within that 60-page audit, there is on page, I think around 3 through 12, there's a nice management discussion and analysis that the town puts together that summarizes some of the key information that took place in the town. I'll try and highlight those as I walk through the executive summary, but really the intent of those eight pages, as you read through those, really gives you an overall understanding of what took place with the town during the year, and just try and highlight it in the financial executive summary. And our key focus ends up being on the town general fund as of December 2019, and where the town ended the year. And again, I mentioned the town ended the year in financial condition. As you can see, the total fund balances increased a little over $2.2 million from last year. Okay, so the town did end the year in a very positive financial condition. Obviously, one of the things that we do include in the audit report is some additional disclosures relating the current economic situation. Obviously, that was known before we issued the financial statements. So we do talk a little bit about the challenges that municipalities may face going forward. This municipality will be no different. But as of December 31st, that snapshot in time, the town did end the year in very good positive financial position. One of the big variances that you notice in this snapshot is in the accrued liabilities area. You see a significant increase from last year to this year. That really is in part due to the implementation of some of the new financial reporting requirements. So now we see a lot of the town's special holding accounts, or those transactions the town is holding, they get reported as part of the general fund going forward. So that's just an unusual spike in that particular code, but that's in recognition of implementing some of the new reporting requirements. It's just a one-time adjustment, more comparative next year. But overall, you can see the town ended the year with a little over $7 million in total fund balance, $7.2 million, and an overall increase of 2.2. And you can see, one of the areas, the appropriated fund balance, what the town is using to support next year's tax levy. You did increase that from 700,000 to 2.1 million, which is part of a planned increase in utilizing those fund balances. So that, again, the town ended the year a little over $4.4 in unappropriated fund balance. So again, very positive. One of the things that I'll mention is that the town did pass a fund balance policy that looks at the unassigned fund balances in the three different key accounts, the general fund, the highway fund, and the library fund. And overall, it's a percentage. You have targets that the town is shooting to obtain. When we look at the three combined funds, you're just slightly above that target percentage. So again, overall, you do continue to be, or were in good financial condition as of December 31st, and in the year in very positive financial condition. As we kind of go through and just talk a little bit about the revenues and expenditures, overall, the total revenues for the year were a little over $12 million. And again, overall, you generated a little over $2.3 million more than you had anticipated. And some of those key areas are on the top half of the revenues, and somewhat consistent with last year, but obviously a little bit better, is in really the non-property tax items, departmental income. So your sales tax. Okay, that's one of the areas where you have generated positive variances in the past. And then your departmental income, primarily in your building permits. And this year you did have one very large permit, Colony Manor, that you did receive a little over $600,000 for. So those are a couple of the key areas. And as you know, in the current financial situation, that'll be an area that you'll want to monitor going forward during the 2020 calendar year. So again, those were some of the key reasons why you did see such an increase in your overall fund balances and how the town reacted to that. Again, going forward on the expense side of the budget, on the total expenditures, okay, the town spent a little over $10 million. You can see that's down from last year. As you know, last year, the town made some fairly significant transfers over to the capital project funds. You can see last year, it transferred a little over $2.7 million. And this year, that's down to about $460,000. But overall, from a budget to budget comparison, you can see you're fairly consistent on the budget side from one year to the next. So again, that's very positive. Again, you're following your plan, and you can see the overall reduction really as a result of the reduced transfers over to the capital fund from the general fund. Okay. Again, so that's a quick discussion of the general fund. We'll move on to the highway fund. If you have any questions, feel free to to ask as we walk through the handouts. I can see a few folks on the screen, but you know, certainly if you have questions as we walk through it, please feel free to let me know. So again, fairly consistent on the expense side of the budget. And with the highway fund, one of the other major town funds, again, at the end of the year, you've got total assets, liabilities, and fund balance. And you can see overall from the highway fund, you ended the year with a little over $1 million in total fund balances. Again, you can see compared to last year, you were fairly consistent. You were down just slightly from last year to this year, okay? And again, there was a planned reduction of fund balance. You had appropriated a little over $500,000 in 2018 to support the 2019 budget. And you can see you've reduced that for the 2019-20 budget. So you're only appropriating $212,000 to support the 2020 budget. But overall, you ended the year in unappropriated fund balance of about $429,000. Those are the dollars that are available for different operations. You've got some encumbrances. You see a jump in there, primarily because of a vehicle that you're purchasing from one year to the next. But again, overall, with the highway fund, for the most part, you broke even. Overall fund balance going down about $87,000 from last year to this year, okay? How we got there, again, the revenues and expenditures for the year. Overall, the revenues for the town in the highway area, you generated about $4.2 million in 2018 to about $3.9 million in 2019, almost $3,950 in 2019. Overall, from a budget comparison basis, you can see the only unusual thing here that jumps out at you is that negative $100,000 variance, the intergovernmental charges, which relates to the services that you work with the county on. So you did less work with the county this year. That's why you see that negative variance. Some of it was because the town was working on other local projects, not being able to participate in some of the other projects that the county wanted you to work on. So overall, you know, that's the only unusual item when it relates to this. But overall, you know, fairly consistent from one year to the next. And from a budget to budget standpoint, you know, just coming in just under what you projected, primarily in the intergovernmental charge area, okay? The expenditures, again, highway fund expense, fairly consistent from last year to this year. Last year you spent $4.2 million, $4,276,000. This year you've spent $4,297,000. So fairly consistent from one year to the next. Again, where you see a little bit of the budget variance ends up being in the transportation area. Again, nothing too unusual there, but again, it has to do with the projects and having a wet season. So you weren't able to get into a lot of the projects that you had anticipated from during the year. So again, that's where you see that budgetary savings there. So overall, again, fairly consistent on the highway fund side from one year to the next. Okay. The sewer fund, again, one of the other major funds of the school or of the town. Again, if you were to look at that snapshot, you've got your assets, liabilities, and fund balances. Okay, a little over $3 million in assets, what you own, some small liabilities, and then fund balance, what you ended the year and overall fund balance for the sewer operations. And again, fairly consistent from last year to this year. You can see overall fund balance increased about $98,000 from last year to this year. Again, nothing too unusual. Again, ending the year with a little over $3.3 million in unappropriated fund balance. Okay. Again, that's that snapshot of the sewer fund. Again, how we got there. Again, from the sewer funds, from an operating standpoint, you had $1.8 million in revenues last year, $1.6 million in revenues this year. And as you recall, the town did lower the sewer rents from last year to this year. So you went from 672 down to 445,000. So you did reduce those sewer revenues from last year to this year. The main departmental income was fairly consistent from one year to the next. And again, from a budget to budget, from one year to the next, you can see that consistency, 200,000 from the positive budget variance on the revenue side for last year and this year. So again, fairly consistent. On the expense side for the sewer fund, again, at the end of the year, you spent a little over $1.6 million. And one of the big variances really ends up being that transfer that the sewer fund made over to some capital projects. So you can see that the overall increase from last year to this year. But again, from a budget standpoint, you were fairly consistent, 336,000 positive budget variance to a $357,000 positive budget variance. Okay, so again, overall, the major increases in this particular fund end up being relating to the transfers to some of the capital related items. Okay. So those are the key funds. The other major fund is the library fund. Again, as of December 31st, if you were to take a snapshot, a picture of the library fund in total, you can see total assets of about 495, liabilities 67,000, and ending fund balances, your equity, 427,000. Again, down slightly from last year, but you can see fairly consistent from last year to this year. Again, really nothing too unusual in the library fund from one year to the next. Again, overall fund balance is going down slightly from last year to this year. And you can see it's in the appropriated fund balance section. So you went from $200,000 down to $100,000 in your appropriated fund balance. But overall, fund balance was fairly consistent from last year to this year. Okay. And again, revenues and expenditures, you can see the revenues overall going from 1.5 million to 2.3 million. Again, that was a planned increase. As you know, the library is been completed, and part of that increase relates to property tax items relating to the corresponding debt that the town is beginning to pay for the library program. So again, you can see that planned increase on the revenue side. Again, on the expense side, you see a corresponding increase. Again, went from 1.5 million to 2.4 million in expenses. And you can see the large increase really ends up being in that in the debt service area, where you're adding a little over $500,000 in debt service expenditures to the library fund. So that relates to the corresponding increase to the property tax items. Okay, so again, overall, very positive financial results as of the end of December 2019. So again, many of the major funds ended the year in very positive financial conditions. This last page just summarizes, the last few pages summarize the other major funds of the town. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on each of the funds, just except a couple, just to identify a couple unique items. As you know, with the drainage fund, the county or the town has been transferring funds over to different capital related projects, and you moved $600,000 out from last year to this year, as you continue to monitor that fund balance and utilize that fund balance for the drainage fund going forward. The street lighting, you just see a little difference from last year to this year, 108,000 positive variance. And if you recall, last year there was a little bit of an issue in 2018 with getting the street lighting on the tax levy. That's been resolved, and you did build a little surplus in there this year to help get the street lighting fund balance back up to about $190,000. And overall, the remaining other funds, really nothing unusual in any of the remaining funds. You've got a new East River Road Mitigation Fund, which again relates to a town and county project. So you did have some transactions in there. The Parks and Parks Trust Funds, you did allocate some funds out of those dollars over to projects to be spent. And then obviously the capital fund. As you know, the town has been extremely active in capital projects over the past few years, spending a little over $7 million in 18, or a little under $7 million in 18, and just under $5 million in 2019. And again, you have issued some debt to help support those different projects that the library has going on. So again, a very, very active capital project. So, you know, in total, the town continues to be in very good financial condition as of December 31st. Obviously, you're all very aware of some of the challenges that are out there as it relates to the towns and all municipalities. Obviously, we've gone into a few months without significant sales tax collections. So you will face some challenges in this current year, but the town has developed and is utilizing a fund balance policy to help monitor and react to the changes. So again, just being aware and monitoring those challenges over the next few months. So that's a quick summary of the 60-page document. There's one other document, the internal control communications, that I'll just highlight. But before I go there, do you have any other questions on this particular document?
Tom, I just want to check a couple statements to make sure they're accurate. So basically, the additional income above budget was consistent with growth in the economy, right? Most of that additional income was seen from either sales tax or project-based stuff, as the economy was growing in 2019. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in the general fund, I think is where you're referring to.
Yes.
The non-property tax items here and the departmental income here. These are two of the lines where you see much better positive variances from last year to this year. And yeah, the non-property taxes relate to sales tax, and then the departmental income, the primary increase relates to the volume of permits that are coming into the town. And in fact, in 2019, you had one significant permit that was, I think, over $610,000.
Right. And
Hey,
then,
Steve, and if
Yeah.
I may, this is Linda. In addition, which is not a substantial amount of money, in state aid, we had some DASNY grants and other grants from prior years that the funding finally came in. So Tom's kind of got the cursor right now on that 160,000. Well, it's not the full amount, it's the largest share of that.
gotcha. And then obviously that additional funding will help us with regards to offsetting pandemic losses, since that additional income was not budgeted. And as per our budget policy, we can use that to offset next year's taxes.
And if I
Correct.
may again, I'm sorry. So basically doing the numbers, we came in at about 26.3% or something for our fund balance. And as you know, our range is 19 to 25. We had already taken into consideration that we were going to have a high fund balance at the end of 2019. And that's why we applied just shy of 2.2 million to the 2020 budget, as opposed to 700,000 in the prior year. But yes, so being in the sweet spot somewhere between 19 to 25, we're slightly over that. So we do have room for whatever could come this way this year.
My point is, even with the 2.1 or 2.2 that we applied to this year's budget, there was still excess left over to potentially apply to next year's budget.
Yeah, and again, because the range is 19 to 25, 25% would have been 4.9 million, and the three funds came in at 5.2 million, so it's about 250,000. But again, we don't have to stay at the top end at 25%. We can go down further.
Right, okay. And then the expenses were under budget, but pretty consistent with the budget. So, you know, as we've been able to make savings, and we have, but again, expenses were pretty consistent with budget, but they were essentially under budget. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep, you can see here, you had anticipating spending about 10.5 million, and you spent a little, just under 10.1 million. So you generated a positive budget variance of about $400,000.
Great.
You spent less than you had anticipated.
And then finally, the last statement I'll make, and we talked about this briefly, but just to summarize it, we hold the balances are largely held in the general, since we can transfer from the general fund to the highway and library funds, but not the other way around. So whereas you've seen the library fund drop some, the aggregate of general, highway, and library has grown. And you know, in some years past, they transfer additional money into the library's funds, but we found that to be inefficient, because if I did that and then they came in under budget, there's no way to recover that money. Let's say that library comes in under budget and highway comes in over budget, or vice versa. There's no way to transfer those monies from one to the other. Whereas if we leave it in aggregate in general, if one of those comes in over budget, we can transfer the money into there to cover that deficit.
Steve, sorry to interject. That's what we did this year as well. Tom had pointed out that we didn't apply as much fund balance in 2020 from highway and library because they didn't have as much fund balance. So the town did put, or the general fund did put a little money into each of those funds for 2020 because they didn't have enough fund balance if we wanted to keep it around a certain amount to use in the following year.
Right. Yeah, so again, what we've been doing is on an as-needed basis, we've been supplementing those from the general rather than transfer the money into those to get them to a 20% fund balance and essentially potentially locking it in there.
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
That makes sense.
Anything else? So I think that covers that. You said, Tom, there was one other thing you wanted to cover?
Yeah, the only other item that we did issue, and I believe went out draft to the town, to the committee, is the internal control communications. And again, that's where we spend time looking at the different policies and procedures of the town. And I'm sorry, I didn't pull that one up on my screen, but it relates to the internal control communication. Again, you should have received a draft copy of that. But again, this is where we sit down and review the different policies and procedures, internal controls, the checks and balances that the town has over their different financial cycles. Again, there are no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies here. The only item that we do talk a little bit about relates to, just cyber risk management and disaster recovery plan. And the town does have plans and does follow various cyber risk and disaster recovery plans. And really the comment really talks about documenting those plans in writing. And then the other item we noted is 5 items we talked about in the prior year the town board has implemented. So again, very, very positive from the financial statement standpoint. It really shows that the town is reacting to recommendations and implementing corrective actions. So again, very positive from the financial statement side. So again, no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, just a minor recommendation to, again, help enhance the checks and balances of the town.
Great. So one of the things I'll note is we actually have a discussion item for a resolution tonight that will actually potentially improve our email security from a cybersecurity standpoint. And we've had a plan in place to do a secondary internet connection. It's been a little bit delayed due to the Pause New York and pandemic stuff. So it will continue forward, although we might put that as one of those items that we will only, you know, depending on how long this, the downturn goes, that might be one of those items that gets delayed till a future year, depending on what expenditures we have. The email security is one that we would want to do sooner because it actually saves us money on an annual basis, whereas the secondary network connection offers us redundancy and protection, but does not save money. In fact, it actually costs us a little bit more to have that in place. So that's one of those, like I said, if I'm looking at the two of which ones I'm going to put in place first, it's the one that gives us additional protection and saves us money. So just thought I'd note that, like I said, we are still actively working on, you know, continually improving our cybersecurity. Yep.
I have one question for Tom and Linda. And the state's been talking about maybe getting some federal funds to local town and municipalities. Do we know if that's going to actually happen this year or if there's any serious talk of that going through?
Yeah,
Tom knows more about that than I do, so I'll defer to him.
yeah, that really is a great question. Where will municipalities end up and how everything shakes out? I'm sure you're all aware that some of the school districts did receive some stabilization funds. Where the town might be able to access some federal funds might be in the FEMA area. I'm not sure in the FEMA area, there's some potential there, but then those funds are very difficult to access and they're very specific. So you'd really have to identify a specific criteria. I'm not quite sure if you've incurred any expenditures that would really fall into that area. But you know, there's that potential would be the FEMA. But any other federal aid, I think what we're hearing is that it's really more of a negotiation right now. And you know, as far as we're aware, there really hasn't been a lot of movement on developing new federal funds to be allocated to municipalities. I know there's been discussion of it. You know, obviously one of the areas that there's been a significant push for is infrastructure related projects. And if something like that moves forward relating to aid for municipalities, there's a very real possibility you could get additional funds through, let's say, DOT for infrastructure related projects. So again, that's just something that we're hearing out there, but from an overall standpoint, we really haven't heard of any movement on aid to municipalities just yet.
So I can add to a couple that, Rob. So the town has been preparing a number of things, so we're ready in case any of these do break. Because one of the things that often happens is it's either first come, first serve, and it's a limited pool of money, or the window is open for a short period of time. And it's a perfect example of that. In the last CARES, it was 3.5. They did include some additional funding for community development block grants. And so we had a number of projects ready to go, and we submitted them for the community development block grants. So, you know, one of the projects that we're doing is to, there's one portion in town that for whatever reason, when they develop that area, it's about 2 to 3 feet below all the surrounding areas. So if during heavy rains, you end up with a lake in the road.
Gotcha.
And so we're looking at how we can deal with that. We put in for that. And then we also put in for, there's a couple places in town where we're still short, where places that should have sewer don't have sewer. And they're in neighborhoods. So if it's in a neighborhood that is eligible for the community development block grants, we actually had some preliminary plans all ready to go.
Great.
And submitted those. So probably $50,000 to $100,000 ish is what we're looking at. If we get them, we should hopefully find out soon. We know we were included in the ask.
Okay, good.
Whether the federal monies will come through. I've also heard from Congressman Joe Morelli that they do have a bunch in there for the local governments to help offset some of the COVID costs. So we've been tracking those costs so that we could potentially recover some of those. I've also been asking for them to take a look at, whether this is actually more at Albany than federal, although I don't care where the funds come from. But one of the things is asking them to look at either abatement or delay of a portion of the school district tax bill, because I know people are going to be hit hard come September when the tax bill comes out. So, anything that the government can do to either abate or delay a portion of that tax bill, I think would be extremely beneficial to the residents and the businesses within towns. Obviously there's a lot of residents who are out of work right now or not earning their full potential because of diminished work. But also there's a lot of businesses that are being hit hard. And, one area specifically that I've yet to see a plan that really addresses them is the hotel industry. Because whereas, restaurants can offer curbside pickup or delivery, that doesn't make sense for a hotel. What's takeout hotel? It makes no sense. So, right now hotels would be seeing 70% occupancy and they're in single digits.
Right.
And the payroll protection plan doesn't really help them because that's only forgiveness if they have all their people on. And well, if they have all their people on, they're paying them to twiddle their thumbs. It's not like manufacturing where I can build up inventory and sell it when the economy resumes. If I clean my rooms 3 times, it's not like I don't have to clean it twice when when basically people stay at the hotel. So, the service area in general and the hotel in specific are being very hard hit. So I've been lobbying at Albany and Washington with regards to that. Whether anything will come from it, I don't know, but those are a couple of areas that, I've been and others have been talking to the governor's office as well as to our congressmen and senators.
Well, that's great news to hear about the projects we've already put in for. Thanks for sharing that.
Hey, Steve, and there's one other thing, and Tom, you can confirm this as well. Because we are an entity that is self-insured for unemployment tax, the federal government will be giving us back 50% of the unemployment that we pay between April 1st and December 31st.
Thanks, Linda.
Any other questions? Do you have any closing comments or questions, Tom?
No, I think this was a great discussion. Again, I think the town is doing everything right in terms of your fund balance. Having that fund balance policy really does provide for a guide. So you're doing a very good job with regard to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Tom.
Okay, thank you very much. You're welcome to leave the meeting unless you have a huge interest in sitting through a town board workshop. And again, thank you to Raymond Wager, CPA, which is now a division of Mengel, Metzger, and Barr. Okay, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. So first up on the agenda will be that we're going to be considering accepting the audited financial statements. Did you want to add anything to that, Linda? Obviously, you've heard the report, but that's what we're going to be voting on.
Yeah, and in addition to just the financial statement, I think I sent out to all the council members. There's also the report of the justice, the town clerk, and the receiver of taxes that will need to be accepted as well.
Any questions on that?
Are we accepting those tonight or are we doing that Wednesday?
I was just figuring we're doing it Wednesday. Is that correct, Linda?
Okay.
That's correct.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, we wanted you to have time to digest what you just heard, but as you heard it, it's very positive. And, again, that's credit not just to this board and this administration, but to previous boards and previous administrations. This town has had good financial leadership for quite some time. There was a little bit of a spending spree for a while, but you know, we've got that. We've been very solid footing for each of the years I've been here. So thank you to everybody who helps make that happen. Anything else on the item 1? Item 2, we're going to consider authorizing me to sign and execute a tolling agreement with Rush Henrietta Central School District. So basically what this agreement is, as you'll remember, we had an Article 10 vote for property owned by the school district, where we, hold on a second. Becky, is there any way to switch the focus back to us?
I'm on it.
Thank you. Thank you. So we basically had an Article 10 vote regarding the historic properties on East Henrietta Road, the Burger Farmhouse, and the Good Shepherd Church. The school district has no use for that school farmhouse. Not only do they not have use, they couldn't use it even if they wanted to, because of their building codes. As a school district, they follow the school building codes, not the general building codes. So we had some initial discussion about the possibility of the town using that as a, essentially as a office space for community organizations. So folks like RAFT, the Rush Henrietta Rotary, I'm trying to remember who they all were now. The Henrietta Foundation. So the idea was that we would use the library and kitchen as sort of common meeting space, and then the other individual rooms would be, you know, an office for each of the major organizations. Today, RAFT is located in a little off room from the cabin in the town park, but that becomes problematic if they want to work on stuff after the town park is closed. It also becomes problematic if they want to get to stuff when there is an event taking place at that cabin. So we think this would help out and could be done at minimal expense to the town. So we wanted to explore that. The school district thinks that that's a great idea and they want to explore it even further. They want to see if there's a way to include the church in a similar arrangement. And I'll get to that in a minute. But the issue is that if we don't end up there, they want to potentially challenge the ruling so that they do have more leeway as to what they can do. But there is a clock required before they file that lawsuit. Neither us nor the school district wants to get to a legal position. We both believe that we can come up with a solution that works very well for the town, the school district, and the community as a whole. And so we want time to explore it. So that's what this tolling agreement does. It essentially puts that legal clock on pause until just over a year from now. And so we already have the first meeting scheduled to start to put some of that together. What we would do is we're going to first start to put together the framework by which we're going to do that. And then, you know, as we come up with ideas, we bounce them back here. But in the tolling agreement, or in the resolution, I think, for the tolling agreement, I talk about that any plan that we do would essentially come back, go to the Historic Site Committee for recommendations, and then for final approval here from this town board. So similar to how Article 10 votes are handled with respect to the Historic Site Committee. So that way they can give us, you know, we make sure it's serving their needs, we make sure it's serving the town's needs, and we make sure it's serving the community needs. So that's what we're looking at. As far as the church goes, there was a discussion. The school district's actually been approached by a number of dance studios and other such organizations as to whether they can rent it. That's a lot harder for the school district to do. Obviously, the town can do that. We do similar stuff with our meeting rooms in the rec center and our cabins. You know, my thought is, whereas I was not originally intending to take the church, if we could do it in such a manner that it was self-funding, then I would certainly be open to that. So, you know, we would have to essentially sit and put together a revenue model to see, you know, what would we have to charge? Are those organizations willing to do that? I'd even take a look at it. Can we sign some of them up on a conditional contract that if we get through this, that they will participate, and, you know, and basically look to see what can we do from that rental space. As someone else pointed out, you know, it's potentially a rental place for weddings, stuff like that. You know, one of the issues that comes in that I want to work with Don Young on has to do with, you know, I'm very cognizant of that as a tax-free organization, you're not supposed to be competing unfairly with commercial entities, and we'll take a look at, you know, is any of that, if we do stuff like that, is that taxable? And it very well may be. I don't know. I just know my only experience with it comes from when I was a trustee at RIT. I know, for instance, the RIT Inn and Conference Center, those operations are taxable, even though the dorm portion of that building, which is part of their educational mission, is not taxable. So, you know, we'll want to hammer out all those things and fully understand how that works before we go that route. But that's the kind of stuff that, like I said, I think we need to get through, understand the plan, which is why originally we were talking about doing it for 3 or 6 months, but between the pandemic, so not knowing exactly when we'll be able to get into this full bore, as well as there's a lot of questions that need to be answered with respect to the church, we decided to just make it a year. That gives us time to do this, to really dig into it and make sure that we've got plans that can work. You know, one of the things I'll note is there was someone who expressed a concern about the town taking properties off the tax roll. I will note that they are currently off the tax roll. So in this case, that's not really applicable. But you know, I am cognizant of that effect, but like I said, it just doesn't happen to apply in this particular case, since as school properties, they're already off the tax roll. One of the things I made clear to the school district, especially with respect to the farmhouse, is that whereas we're happy to take it on, I'm not interested in buying it other than for a nominal amount, because when I look at it again, I look at that we're doing it for a couple of reasons. We're doing it because we'd be able to preserve it, whereas they're not interested in that. But to that point, we're saving them any maintenance costs if they have to preserve it, any demolition costs if they don't have to preserve it. From a setback standpoint, if that thing goes away, they can't really build necessarily in that setback area anyways. And they're, by the way, getting 2/3 of that parcel already for their land, which is the primary reason they bought those properties, was for the land. So from a value standpoint, the building itself, to their own admission, has no value to them. In fact, I would argue it has negative value, that we're saving them money. One could argue that the school district should pay us to take it off their hands. I don't know that I'm going to get that draconian with them, because again, we have a really good working relationship with them. But the point being, if we're buying it for $1, because typically in a contract, you have to have a price.
Right.
That's more the price I'm going for. The church itself has a bit more value. But again, when they look at it, when they were talking about it, that it was going to cost them a lot of money to revamp that church to bring it up to school codes. So again, I'm pointing out to them, we're saving you a lot of money by you not having to do that and us taking it over instead. And so, whereas I can justify the operating cost because we can offset that with revenue for the facility, I can't justify a big purchase. The point being, if the school district wasn't involved, there's no way we'd be buying that church. It's that simple. So they understand that, and their language more recently seems to indicate that they understand that, but you know, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So,
True.
you know, we'll get into those discussions, but that's kind of where I'm going with that, is that I'm happy to take them on, but I'm not willing to spend a bunch of town dollars to acquire them.
Mr. Supervisor, can I ask a question about the church?
Yep.
What was their plan with the church?
Their plan was to convert it, to bring it up to code. So that building, because of the material it's made of and the size, they could bring that up to code. Their plan was to use it as kind of a performing arts center, for lack of a better way to put it. That, you know, they'd have a stage, they could be doing small concerts there, or, you know, choral singing, maybe the MLK singers could perform there, stuff like that.
And they're saying because of the cost, that's changed. They don't want to do that.
They would prefer not to do it. They will if they have to. If we can't come up with an agreement, they'll go that route. But obviously, if they can find a way to save that cost and preserve the church, they're interested in exploring that. One of the things that they said that they can't, from a liability, I think it was other reasons, they have issues in terms of renting their facility to outside
Okay,
organizations.
gotcha.
Where, you know, it's, again, we don't have as much restrictions. You know, part of it, if it's part of their school program, they've got the issue of essentially protecting the children and stuff like that. So like I said, their regulations are a lot different than ours. So they believe that we'd be able to recognize revenues that they would not, which would make it more affordable for us. In addition, it's cheaper for us to bring it up to the general construction codes than it is for the school district to bring it up to the educational construction codes.
So I'm assuming that at some point they did an estimate on what it might take for them to do that.
They did.
So I guess that we're going to do an estimate on what it would take us to do that before we
That
even
is,
look at trying to take this on.
that is absolutely correct. Yeah, so we would, you know, that's why, like I said, it's going to take some time. We would put together essentially a cost estimate to make it ADA compliant, and to any additional interior remodeling necessary to serve the function that we're looking to do. You know, one of the things before we do that cost, we'd first figure out what we're looking to do with it. And then we would say, okay, if that's what we're going to do, what modifications have to be in place?
I'd just like to
Once we do that, then we would basically say, okay, now that we know what we have to modify, how much would that cost?
Okay. Can I request that this board is a part of those discussions as they go on?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
I don't know that.
That's just a big project to
Right.
take on as our town.
So, oh, absolutely. So, you know, again, whether the whole board's going to be meeting with the, I suspect what'll happen is we'll have a subcommittee, for lack of a better way to put it, but it's a smaller group working with the interaction with the school board, but we would be giving regular updates to this board and taking any suggestions, changes back. And that periodically there would be larger meetings between the town and the school board. So in other words, or not the school board, school district, but that might include some representatives from their school board.
Gotcha.
Because ultimately, just as our side has to be approved by our town board, theirs has to be approved by their school board.
Gotcha.
So, you know, like I said, there'll be both smaller detail type sessions and then a number of larger, I don't know what you would want to call them, but basically overview or I guess strategic decisions, whereas the tactical decisions would be in the smaller group. And then in addition, there would also be, in my opinion, there'd be public hearings on it. Whatever we're going to decide to do would be a public hearing before we ever executed on it.
This is more of a technical question than legal, maybe. I mean, if we're doing this for a year, assuming nothing really comes about that we can come together as boards, what happens after that year? Will they be extended another year, or now is it really time for them to make a decision?
I mean, obviously that's up to us at that point, right? If we think, oh, we're so close, we can extend it. If
Okay.
we decide, well, it's pretty obvious after a year, we're never going to get anywhere on this, then we don't extend it. But we didn't put anything in there looking at that for the simple reason that we don't know where we're going to be in a year. So let's deal with that a year from now.
Where's our attorney in all this? I didn't hear from Don Young.
It's because I haven't stopped talking. Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Barley, how can I help you, sir?
I was just wondering about the tolling, and if after a year, you know, we made good efforts to get together as boards between the school and the town, but there's not a meeting of the minds. Can this agreement be extended by the parties, or is that a cutoff?
Yeah, the parties could they could enter into a new agreement. They could try to extend this agreement, or, you know, they could let it lapse and then move forward under the law. So what happens is you know, when this thing lapses in a year, then the school district will be at the same timing it is when the agreement went into effect. And if this is approved, then I think the agreement will go into effect on May 1st. So however many days they had left on May 1st to file a lawsuit, that'll be the number of days they have left when this agreement expires, unless we extend the agreement. And you know, my guess and hope is that we'll know well before, you know, the expiration, even if it's 9 months from now, whether this is going to work or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. If we're still going after 9 months, now again, the pandemic could change that. But assuming, you know, we continue on the approach, and for those who haven't heard, Monroe County is one of the few regions in New York State that met all the criteria necessary. So Pause New York phase 1 relaxation will occur starting this Friday.
Is that the 15th?
That is.
Okay.
So
That's good news.
yeah. So the work we did distributing masks, the work we've done in terms of getting more people out to more essential workers to do testing, and the work especially the county did recruiting contact tracers. We've met we met the last 2 criteria. And so we should start to see the relaxation. It's essential that people continue to observe social distancing, continue to wear masks out in public, continue to do the things that we've been doing, even as we start to, you know, so phase 1, I believe, is construction. Forgot what the other one is, but manufacturing.
Yeah.
So as those start to ramp up, you know, stay safe, because if we can stay below R1, which basically means for every person, essentially, that if somebody's sick, only one other additional, as they recover, only one other additional person gets sick. And that way you'll not see a growth in cases, you'll see a decline in cases. So as long as we can stay under that R1 will continue to progress. Excuse me, it's important that we don't see everybody say, woohoo, it's over, and run outside without masks and start shaking hands and, you know, take an unsafe behavior, because as we've seen in places where that has happened, they've seen spikes. You know, let's continue on our good progress. So like I said, hopefully we'll continue in that direction. We'll be able to get this plan in place. We'll be able to hold public hearings to talk about it. And we'll get something in place that, as I said, serves the school board, serves the school district, serves the town, and serves the community.
Do we have any protections in place for the structures?
So I am discussing that with Andrew right now. The only issue, he said, from a heating standpoint, there is not currently a working furnace in the schoolhouse.
In the farmhouse?
In the farmhouse, sorry, thank you. So we will need to take a look at that in terms of if this drags on beyond the fall, how can we get that heating in place? I know we just had a one night where it was below temperature,
That was
but
freezing, yeah.
that it's right. The interior of the building isn't going to freeze.
That
that
would
quickly.
froze the pipes.
Right. The water is shut off. You know, I also talked to them about, can their maintenance crews, I know they can't do a whole lot, but like, for instance, if a window breaks, can they, even if it's just temporarily boarding it, I basically told them I want there to be enough maintenance on it such that the property does not continue to deteriorate. So I'm discussing with them right now, and hopefully I'll have that in place before Wednesday.
Well, they purchased it, so they should be taking care of it until it's sold or.
Kind of the thought I had, that because it sounds like they don't want to take care of it. That might not be true, but have they had anybody look at the furnace to see what it takes to fix it?
I don't think they have. There's a difference between taking care of it and putting money into it. Right?
Yeah, but you know, sometimes you can have a furnace guy come by and take a look at it. It might only be a blower or something that costs $400 or $500.
Right.
So because they do own it, the onus is on them to take care of that.
Understood.
You know,
So, but again, a furnace is not going to be essential for some time now. Whereas it might be cold from a living standpoint, no one's living in it. It's not going to be cold to the point where the building is suffering damage.
to
So-
Michael Stafford's point, and you're talking about it too, it's really not this board's responsibility to worry about that furnace. It's theirs. So that's why I asked, have they had someone go and take a look at it?
You're asking the wrong person.
Okay,
I will, if I can find that answer, I will, but I don't know.
okay. I
Um,
can call over.
And have there been any conversations about maintaining the church?
Yes, and he did say that that does have working furnace, and they do, they have had their maintenance person in there periodically, if I remember the email correctly.
Hope they shut off the water. It
For, that's a good question.
doesn't even take a frozen, to freeze, to break a line even, so.
Mhm.
They are checking in on the church periodically, yes. So they do have their maintenance person going into the church. Okay,
The only other thing I would have to add is because we reduced the property lines, we'd have to make sure that it includes some parking, that they will.
yeah, so what we would probably look at, there would be a little bit of dedicated parking, but I would want a shared parking agreement with the school district, because if there's, especially when you look at for the church,
Right.
I'd rather not pave the front lawn. I'd rather leave the front lawn green.
Right.
So I'd rather for event parking be able to use to, have a shared parking agreement with the school district. Now, that might also mean that we would have to schedule any major events around major school events. So for instance, if there was a night football game, we wouldn't want to have
Right.
a major event at the same time. But even if we weren't sharing parking, I wouldn't want to do that from a traffic standpoint anyway, so.
Okay.
But yes, that all has to be in there. So what we'll probably do, again, we're going to get the initial setup going, and then what we'll probably do is have whether we do it at a workshop or somewhere else, we'll have an initial, let's start thinking about, and you can do this in the meantime, start thinking about what kind of things do we want to cover in this, in terms of a plan. What do we want to have in place to make sure that, we check all the boxes in putting this together? Because again, I don't want to take on a boondoggle. I want to do something that is workable and will benefit all of us. So,
Good idea. Okay.
any other questions on that?
No, sir.
Thank you. Next one is the call for a public hearing to revise the chicken coop provisions. So as we discussed previously, the chicken coop provisions are out of date. There are some strange, both inconsistencies as well as strange requirements, such as this town board is technically supposed to review every single chicken coop application in town every single year. That does not seem like a good use of a town board's time. So we are revising that. One of the things I wanted to make sure is that we are looking at I wanted to update some of the code with regards to setbacks because especially in residential neighborhoods, I don't want the chickens to be a nuisance to the neighbors. Some of those are going to be stricter than the current codes. So I talked to Don about, could he put something in there for what's usually referred to as grandfathering, although it's truly pre-existing non-conforming condition. So he put something in there that basically says they can continue to operate in those conditions as long as they meet all the previous requirements. And then he lists the major ones. And then we talk about that if they do an expansion, so not necessarily if let's say they used to have 4 hens and they go to 6, which I think is what the limit was.
Yeah.
They don't come under the new codes, but if they want to enlarge the chicken coop or, build a bigger pen around it, in that case, they would come under the new codes, including that might require them to move their chicken pen before enlarging it, because they're basically, we just wanted to have it in there that, if they had a problem with their current chicken coop and needed to repair it or replace it or that kind of stuff, they could do that even if they were non-conforming, as long as they're not growing it. So that's what we're looking at. Oh, the one other thing I'll comment is that in the new code also, it was always the same number of chickens in the same size coop, regardless of whether I was in a 1/4 acre lot in the middle of an R115 residential district, or if I was on a 50-acre lot in a rural residential. That made no sense to us. So we looked at putting in, for the rural residential, they can essentially go bigger, even before they get to the agricultural exemption of having to make $10,000 income off of their chickens. But, again, part of the point of moving to the country is to be able to have, the chickens that serve the nature. And even here within the town, so, at Pictometry, she was referred to as Aunt Ree, but she's the woman who owns the top of the hill and actually still has cows right here on Methodist Hill. A lot of people don't realize they're there, but they are. She has chickens. And, again, she's essentially grandfathered in because she's well, actually not even just grandfathered, she's covered under agricultural law because she has the stuff. But the point being, she's technically in an industrial district, but it's, we want to make sure that we cover that difference between, again, it's not one size fits all because some of these lots are pretty darn small. So anyway.
Do you know offhand how many permits for chicken coops we have in residential neighborhoods? R1?
Do you have any idea on that answer, Kevin? You're muted if you answered.
What was it? I'm sorry.
How many chicken coops we have in residential neighborhoods these days? Like, I don't know how many permits are out there.
I think there's about 20 licenses out there.
Okay. You want to pause while he's getting feedback? Or not pause, mute. Okay, so he basically said there's about 20 licenses out there.
Just
curious. Yep. One of the things, if I remember correctly, we have been receiving few additional ones I guess the pandemic has taught people, maybe I want to have some of my own eggs. Anything else on that? So again, this is just calling for the public hearing.
Steve, this is Don. Can you guys hear me?
Done.
Okay. I just want to bring to the forefront of this, I think the law that's proposed addresses a lot of the procedural issues, the annual inspections, the coming before the town board, all that stuff, which was cumbersome in terms of permitting. But one thing I noticed when looking through this stuff was that it might be worthwhile for the town to have a discussion or consider looking at the setbacks that are required for chicken coops. I think right now it's 5 feet from a side setback, or at least 20 feet from a residential structure. And, just looking at a typical third of an acre backyard, if someone's got a huge chicken coop 5 feet off your property line, those chickens are right there. And maybe that's okay, and maybe it's not. But it's just worth thinking about as we update this law, whether you want to have a max chicken coop size, whether you want to have setbacks that increase as the yard gets bigger, or as the coop gets bigger, or as you have more hens.
Right. I agree. That's part of what I want to do at the public hearing, because I don't think any one of us own chicken coops.
Yes.
Oh, you do?
We have
All
one.
Yes.
We have one.
Boom.
Oh, good. Wasn't aware of that. So, I want to hear from some people who own chicken coops and some people who are neighbors to people who own chicken coops, so we can get some good feedback with respect to those exact issues.
I know that when I was on the zoning board, Don and I did have one that came by, and there was a specific way of processing their feces. I don't know if it was Minnesota, I don't know if it was Missouri University, but some kind of way you're supposed to manufacture it. Are those things changing, or are they staying the same? Have they changed at all, Don, do you know?
In the law we have on the table now, it focuses almost entirely on procedure and not as much on substantive changes. And so, no, I think the law as it is now, and as it would be, essentially says you've got to show us your plan to dispose of waste.
Okay.
And it has to be acceptable to the town.
And if you remember, Peter was the urban chicken manure management specialist. Was one of his titles. So he would basically, with his agricultural background, he would follow that. So I've asked Craig to start learning about chicken manure. Not the exact phrase I use, but.
It might be worthwhile too to take a look at some of the other urban chicken guidelines and laws, because it is kind of a very popular and big thing. And I would almost suspect that there might be more than 20 chicken coops within Henrietta. They just don't necessarily all understand that they need to update their.
I think that question was how many are, the 20 was how many licensed in the residential areas.
I can't even remember how
Right,
many
yeah.
chickens you got to have before you have to have a permit. I think it's 6.
No, it's 1.
Really?
Yes.
You can't have more than a certain.
You can't have
Can
more
I
than
have
6.
more than 8?
Well, then,
Or 8?
yeah,
8,
we
sorry.
got a lot more chicken coops than permits in our town.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, I do think that's part of the confusion is, how do you update it and all of that sort of thing. So there is regulations around dog licensing, and if we want to have, the same sort of thing with chicken coops, then we have to have that sort of process in place.
It's very popular.
But I will point out that every dog license renewal does not have to come in front of the town board.
No.
So on that note, are we still going to have someone go in annually, look at procedures are being followed for the chicken coops, or?
So the way, and again, I want to have this discussion largely at the public hearing and hopefully have some people online who are either have a chicken coop or are applying for a chicken coop. I don't want to necessarily lock us into that we have to be there every year, that type of stuff. I'd rather not write something that is easily violated, for lack of a better way to put it. And what I mean by that is by us, right? That right now we're not following the rules of the current code. We haven't for some time. I wasn't even aware of that, the bizarre stuff about the town board until an applicant brought it to my attention that he wanted to come in front of the board for his chicken coop hearing. I said, you don't have to come in front of the board. He says that, he sent me the section of code. I was like, wow. You know, I want it to be, I'd like to have a discussion on it in terms of, you know, how can we make it in terms of that we have the ability to inspect, whether it's every X number of months, but not necessarily a hard code-based obligation to do so, type of thing. But like I said, I want to have those discussions. So my plan is, you know, we're going to have this public hearing on the laws it's written now, have a bunch of discussions. Then we're probably going to revise the law, have another public hearing before it gets adopted.
Sounds good.
You know, it's possible we could adopt the procedural stuff and then do a subsequent update on the setbacks and other stuff like that. And what I would suggest is that we kind of, I don't know what the rules are and how long we have to submit to the town, or to the state, but I would basically want that we don't go to code 360 until both of them are done, so that we pay one update fee instead of two.
Right. Makes sense.
But like I said, I suspect a lot of that's going to come out in the public hearing. Anything else on the chicken coop?
Good.
So where we're at right now, we're looking to move forward on the RFP for the street lights. We were even thinking about possibly having, for this meeting, we decided there's enough stuff on this coming meeting, so we're gonna discuss it now to let you know where we're at, with the goal of essentially putting together an RFP for approval at the next meeting. And so I've asked Deputy Town Supervisor Craig Eckert to take the lead on that. We've been getting not just sample RFPs, actual RFPs from other towns in New York who've gone and done the process. We have gotten the inventory from RG&E. If you ask some of the manufacturers, there's a debate as to whether RG&E's inventory is accurate, meaning there's often a lot of ones that aren't on there. We're taking a look at, excuse me, we had someone produce a study for us as far as the relative cost between, so our options are, we can leave the lights, fixtures, and the ownership of RG&E and have them upgrade to LEDs. Although I will say that I'm very disappointed in the options they have in LEDs to date. They are going to be getting some more, but they certainly seem behind the times. The other option is for us to buy the poles from RG&E, and instead we would just pay for connection and electrical. That connection could include a pole mounting fee if our light is like a Cobra arm attached to an RG&E utility pole. They're two different tariff rates. So we have from RG&E, what the two different costs would be, and what the electrical savings would be. We did not share any of that information from RG&E is under a confidentiality agreement. So we've not shared that. But like I said, we asked somebody to do an estimate based off of typical numbers. And then what we did is we went in and looked at what our numbers are. And they were actually pretty close. The typical numbers were actually pretty close to where RG&E was. But we adjusted the numbers up or down. So we'll present, when we bring this forward, we'll present that comparison. It's pretty clear that we're better off going where we buy them. It's, according to the one analysis, it's about a 3.8 year payback According to another, it's a little over 4 years. But the reduced tariff rates alone pay it back pretty quickly. So what I wanted to do is if you guys had any questions for Craig, or Craig, if you wanted to add anything that you think I've missed, and just, you know, as far as what kind of things do we want to have in our RFP as it goes out. We've got about 4 vendors, correct me on that number, Craig, but about 4 vendors that have expressed an interest in participating in this RFP. Craig?
Yep, I'm here. I think we've talked to at least 6 companies that are that do these kinds of things. They all have the next great slicer, dicer, etc. Process. It's so going out for an RFP would be a great way to, you know, evaluate what they intend to do, and then try to put down a guarantee for a benefit to the town, savings, and the buyback. We can look at all those and wage a rate percentage to those and to a performance as far as cost and etc. So I think it would be beneficial for the town. We can certainly provide that information to the board so that we can make a decision on how we want to go forward.
And so I suspect, for instance, we'll have a few ad alternates, such as, you know, as many of you are aware, we've had a lot of problems with the light fixtures on Calkins Road. You know, maybe we do an ad alternate to upgrade those to a more reliable fixture. We might do an ad alternate for upgrading the lights at the parks, stuff like that. So that, you know, that way it'll be based off the base bid plus whatever ad alternates we do, and that will largely be cost-based.
Okay, that was my question. Can we get a list of all the fixtures that we're talking about, you know?
We have that list from RG&E, and almost all these folks, they come in and they actually go out and they survey all of them, and they identify any that RG&E might be missing.
Okay.
Or that we're getting charged for that no longer exist anymore.
Right. Okay.
That can also happen. Any other?
Yeah, along with a GPS location, which will work well for our GEIS, for our GIS.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anything you think you want us to look into, or, you know, include in that RFP? Obviously, you're going to have a chance to review what the RFP is going to be when we put out the bid. But like I said, I don't know if there's anything you can think of.
Not right
front
now.
that. Okay. If you think of something, just send it to Craig or I, and
Okay.
we'll make sure we address that in our RFP call. Okay, thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Okay, number 5. It's a purchase equipment, email server, and spam archiving service. So we're discussing a couple different routes on how to go with this one. There is some, I guess I'll call it urgency with this because of a charge for our current solution coming up in the not too distant future.
Okay.
We've gotten good quotes on the hardware. The question has to do with the spam archiving service. And one of the things I wanted to bring up at this discussion right here, just to get everyone's opinion on it. And Andrew and I were just talking about this just prior to the meeting. So the second part is actually an online service. And part of what that gets into is if our network connection here in town goes down, it would allow people to still get at their emails. And I questioned this afternoon that that's a per year cost. Now it's much cheaper than the current solution in terms of either half or a third, but it's still a significant annual cost. And I guess I have to ask the question, are we better off, instead of doing that, taking the money and putting it towards the secondary internet connection and potentially even a backup server? To give you an idea in terms of the cost, a backup server, the payback on that would be about 1 to 1.5 years. So in terms of avoiding those costs, I guess I look at it, and I will happy to hear from my directors as well. You know, is it, if we're down for 24 or 48 hours, if you can't use the systems on your computer here anyway, is there a whole lot of business that can be conducted just by email? It seems to me without, for instance, the assessors being able to get at the assessor stuff, or the clerks without being able to get to their systems, that the email doesn't really buy them a whole lot. And that I don't know that it justifies the, you know, $3,000 to $5,000 a year cost to be able to have remote access. It's not like we're a company that's out revenue if we lose sales. So I'm just curious what people think on that, as to, do we think it's worth spending the extra every year to have remote access, even if our server's down, network's down? In terms of what failures we've had, you know, there have been a few, but they typically have not lasted long.
That was, I
That
was
was
gonna
gonna
ask,
be my first question.
right, how long,
Yeah.
you know.
Andrew, do you have you seen any outages while you've been here? And if so, how often and how long?
No, I haven't. Actually, you know, knock on wood, our internet connection has been very stable. I haven't seen, there's a few times when, or I should say maybe one time when I got a notice that there was a scheduled maintenance. But this is usually done in the wee AM, you know, AM time. So, yeah, you know, things have been pretty solid.
But I mean, obviously, as we saw happen twice in this town, a dump truck operator who doesn't put down his body of the truck, right, drives out and takes out a bunch of communication lines. So, I mean, it can happen. But again, I guess I have to ask the question, is there anything that we do via email that is that critical that we can't be without it for a day or two? I don't know that there is. So I'm not sure that the second half makes a large expense, makes sense. So one of the things we've talked about, and we won't have it now we could potentially have it by Wednesday. So for that reason, by the way, I don't want anyone discussing any of the numbers that you see in your quotes, because we're still out getting numbers. But, you know, when I look at the, that spam archiving service, you can also, instead of doing it as a service, you can do it as an appliance. And oh, by the way, you know, the appliance is probably cheaper than a single year of service. So it just seems to me, it makes more sense to do it with an appliance. You know, so we would meet all the state archiving laws. You know, we could even do where we back up to an offsite storage. I'd rather have a cloud backup storage solution
So,
than the offsite cloud solution for email.
so
Andrew?
another thing to consider is maybe if we have a set number of you know, email accounts that we would consider you know, vital to the town, we could put those on something like Exchange Online. So, you know, maybe a general inbox for the town clerks that, you know, that mail can still flow in the event that, you know, something like this happened where like an ISP link goes down. It could also fit into our, you know, business continuity plans. You know, hey, we lose the entire campus or something. You know, we'll have maybe, you know, a dozen or so accounts in the cloud that, you know, we can still communicate with the public.
That's a good idea. That's a nice solution, so that, like, you know, maybe it's one per department, for lack of a better way to do it. So now instead of, you know, the quotes we've been receiving is for 105 email accounts. We'd be looking at, 10, which obviously would bring the monthly costs or annual costs way down. One of the other things the other reason I rail against a cloud email solution for everything is because today not every town employee has an email. I would love to fix that so that I can send out notices to all town employees.
Yeah, seems kind of be central.
And the reason that everyone doesn't have it is because it gets too costly. Those annual costs now in the 3 to 5K range are in the 6 to 10K range per year. Well, actually, currently it's in the 12K range, so it would have doubled it to 24. So I'd prefer to not have a cloud-based solution that essentially is a disincentive for us to give everybody email access. And by going with the hardware local server solutions, I do get that. And I like Andrew's idea that as we identify critical emails that we would like to have up in the event that the rest of the system's down, we can identify those and just get the 360 or 365 or whatever they call it, email access so that it's also up in the cloud in addition to being down on the server.
So what you're saying is you would prefer to purchase a server so that you could provide email access for all employees?
So we're already doing that as a server today. No matter what we're doing, we're looking at, that's what the email server is. The question is whether there is a cloud element to it that allows us to essentially a cloud fallback.
Mm-hmm.
If the server is not available, you can still access through the cloud until it comes down into your server.
Okay.
I don't know that that's worthwhile other than, as Andrew points out, for a couple key accounts, it doesn't make sense that everybody needs that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in terms of what we've got currently in the, so as you might have seen, there's 3 options currently. There's probably going to be a 4th option, and that was discussed at 4 o'clock as Andrew and I were brainstorming. So it didn't obviously make it in this board packet. But, one of the things that I look at is that I figure we can set if we don't have all the answers by Wednesday, we can set a maximum. To be honest, the other stuff it's all below the $8,000. The only reason we're voting on it is because in aggregate, it's just over $8,000. So, my thought is let's put a budget towards this, approve a budget towards going in that particular route, and then we'll get it as, cost effectively as possible, and just do that. So that, again, obviously, if we can have all the hard quotes and we're ready to go by Wednesday, we will. If not, I might look at that we authorize, we come up, if we've got a single quote, now we can do a not to exceed number, because either that one is the lowest or the other ones are below it. So I think we'll be able to have a single quote, at least a single quote ready for Wednesday, so we can, again, have a not to exceed number if we're going to go the hardware solution.
Okay.
Directors, is there anyone who feels that we need that email access if town hall is currently offline? Other than maybe a few critical accounts?
I like the critical account idea.
Okay,
Just maybe one, like you said, one per department.
right.
would
Yeah,
work.
so like, how we have an assessor at henrietta.org or a town clerk at henrietta.org, building at henrietta.org. Maybe those are the ones that we do as the backup. So that you've got something you can use in the event that we're down.
Yeah, I don't foresee any real issues with it. I trust Andrew.
Okay. Any other questions from the town board?
No, sir. Nope.
Number 6, Mr. Martin. It's the sanitary sewer and lateral repair project. Consider awarding bid. You're muted if you're talking. You're apparently asleep or away from the meeting.
I see his face.
I can go check on it if you want.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll be talking about it. So basically, we got the responses for the bids, or I should say response. Fortunately, it was the same company that the second company from last year, or maybe it was the only company from last year. The one that did a really good job. Oh, he's showing up. That's what his problem is. Apparently his microphone wasn't working.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Martin.
Hello.
Council members?
Make sure you're speaking to the microphone. Can people online hear Mr. Martin? Go ahead, speak.
All right. This is for the bid opening for the 2020 sanitary sewer project. The bad news is we only had
Can you
one
tap
bid.
your microphone? Make sure. Okay, it is
Yeah, it's
working.
on.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So we had one bid, but the good news is it was the right bidder. Their estimate was for $423,200, which is about $50,000 less than what the engineer's estimate was.
Great.
So overall, it was a good bid, and we got a good contractor, and he would like to start work probably within the next week or two, once we have all the bonds in and such. But he's ready to start work now.
And what he means by the right contractor is, I think it was 2 years ago, we had a lot of complaints about that contractor. This past year, we had very few complaints and a lot of compliments about the contractor last year. So this is the one that has done a better service, that the residents were much more appreciative of the work they were doing. They did a better job in that regards. And obviously also, as Chris mentioned, it's essentially under budget. So
Great.
Yeah, we had very few complaints from last year for lawn restoration. So the work that we're doing is generally in the Hollybrook area.
Okay.
We're doing a lot of the short side services. So we have a few on there, a few on Faircrest, Eaton Circle, in those areas. So we're mainly concentrating on the Hollybrook area.
This is a continuation of what we've been doing from.
Right, really
Yeah.
for the last 10, 11 years.
Right.
How many projects actually, total projects are there? I mean, individuals.
As far as laterals,
And if you know offhand,
yeah, I think between the short side and the long side, I can tell you in a minute. There are 52, hold on, 17 long side laterals and 44 short side laterals. There's more short side laterals because about 5 years ago, we replaced all the long side laterals on Hollybrook. But we found out it's just better to, get one street done and out of the way. So there's more short sides, which kept the cost down, but, we still have a good amount of long sides as well.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, any
Thank
other
you.
questions? Great, I'll call back.
I'm just seeing if you were on, I think that was your only one this week.
That was, yes.
Let's keep him here. We need him for more stuff.
No, Becky's gonna kill me if I stay here any longer.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Bye, Mr. Martin.
Number 6. Why don't we do 6 and 7 together?
Need 7 and 8?
We did 6.
7 and 8, sorry, thank you. 7 and 8 together, the purchasing equipment for the sewer department and highway department. So the sewer service truck and a steel drum roller. Chuck?
Yep, the highway budget has funds to replace a 17-year-old roller that we've got our money's worth out of. And a newer one with newer technology and better compaction. And then the sewer department, we're currently, the highway department and sewer department shares a crane lift truck to do their work. And as with the increase in work, the increase ability to have conflicts when that truck's needed by both departments on the same day. So since sewer has the money and the one that they're sharing is getting really old, it was built in 1996. We wanted to give a more reliable piece of equipment to the sewer department to continue operations.
The sewer also generally has heavier lifts because of the equipment they're pulling out of the pump stations and stuff like that. Too.
Yes, and this vehicle will actually get them closer to the lift station they have to work, and it has a much heavier crane to do the work on it, so.
Yeah, so it made a lot more sense to have the sewer department get the new truck and meet their capabilities, because the old truck will meet the needs of the highway department. Other than they'll probably complain about its age, but.
Well, it'll be good for a couple of more years, and then and they have to end up replacing that one as well. But.
Right. Any questions on those?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much, Chuck. So next up we have 9 and 10. 9 is the discussion of the 4th of July events. 10 is discussion of the summer programs. I wish I had noticed, I'm actually going to switch the order. I'm going to actually have us discuss the summer programs first, and then we'll go into the 4th of July.
Okay.
Jason, do you want to give a quick rundown of the summer programs just to set them up? I basically asked Jason and his team to go through the summer programs, decide which of them could be done in a modified manner and which of them had to be canceled. So, some events, and we had a discussion with this in the county phone call today, when you look at things like tennis and badminton, they're much lower risk than, for instance, football, rugby, even basketball, and any of the sports where I'm essentially actively defending someone right up against them is going to be a much higher risk than sports where I am opposite each other across the net. So, we took a look at all the various programs and, would come up with plans on how we, one of the things we would require for each of them is that they would have a plan on how to keep folks safe. But Jason, I don't know if you have a summary of what we'd be looking at.
Doesn't look like Jason.
Jason, you're muted if you're talking. Mr. Kulik.
Jason.
We're not hearing you. It's probably going to be a long run to get over here like Chris did.
He can do it. He's young.
That is Jason in the upper right that we're seeing.
That is Jason. Doesn't look like he's even hearing us.
It doesn't show that he's muted on the feed.
Okay.
Yeah, and he doesn't appear to be talking.
He looks, I think he's trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me too.
He has been texting me. He's listening. I just texted him that they are calling him.
Does he not have a microphone in his computer or something?
Well, he wasn't even talking. I don't think.
It actually doesn't even show he has his audio on.
Oh, maybe he didn't sign into the computer audio.
He's got his video on, but not his audio.
Come on, Jason. Connect your audio.
Maybe you should write some big signs.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Do you know sign language?
I just.
Hello, Lisa.
He could call.
How are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah.
Craig's holding up signs.
That's a good idea, Craig.
I can't read your sign though, Craig. Oh, it just says Jason.
Good thing you're wearing glasses.
Jason, you're up. No, he didn't use a heavy marker. It's hard to see. Yeah, Jason just.
For now, I'm going to have you come in via my phone. I'm going to put you on speaker. Okay. Go ahead and talk. We'll see if everybody can hear you.
So we on 4th of July?
Yeah, I actually wanted to start with discuss the summer programs first. So I explained to them how I gave you the list of the, wanted you to go through the list as far as what we can do safely in modified mode, or what stuff actually had to be canceled.
Right, so if you're looking at the list, we've got about half the programs that we feel, once restrictions are lifted in phase 4 of the governor's reopening plan, we could modify those programs so that we keep our participants safe and our employees safe as well. And the major program that we need to take into consideration is our summer smart play program, we're calling it, which would take place at a variety of schools within the district. We'd have 4 sites proposed with 5 classrooms in each building. Did the board receive the proposal that I sent out earlier this afternoon?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so there's a list of precautions there that we had proposed. And we're just hoping to get some insight from you all as to if this is something we should continue to pursue or not.
Okay.
How many Cub Care participants do we usually have each year?
Typically, we get anywhere from 80 to 100 kids per camp. And we usually have 5 locations for our summer playground program. But this obviously would be a modified plan. We certainly would not be able to do any of our field trips, would not be able to have special guests. This would be a more reserved program in an effort to provide care for our resident parents.
Do we even know if the school district is going to let us use their buildings this year?
We have been in communication with the school district, and we've received word that they are in support of providing us the space needed in order to run this program.
And Jason, if I can add a little bit. So Anita has been working with Monroe County Department of Health, and what's the acronym?
I can't hear what Councilwoman Safranek is saying.
It wasn't.
It's Linda.
It was Linda.
Oh.
She was saying that, so you're not getting audio on this feed?
Just from you, Steve.
Okay. So anyway, Linda was saying that
Anita.
We've also been in communication with the Department of Health and she couldn't remember the acronym for the child.
CSH?
That's the one.
And those 2 entities are in support of something for children, and they're backing this. Anita has filed paperwork with both of them to go through, and they've been in communication with the school district as well. They are basically asking us to do something this summer on their behalf, because there's going to be a lot of school-age children with nowhere to go this summer. And to Jason's point, we won't have field trips. We won't be playing on playgrounds. We won't be permitted into any of the common area places of the school. We will be put into just those classrooms as is written out on this, and they'll break that up, and then they'll have outside play activity as well. But again, minimizing playground and coming up with other sorts of activities, and absolutely no field trips.
I'm a kid, that sounds boring.
Or Rob, you can just—
Fortunately, it's where the world is at right now.
Just sounds boring. If I'm going to that camp, I'm bored like heck.
Yeah, my kids all did those programs. They were awesome when they were normally the way they were.
Yeah, I mean, again, the option is that your parents don't work and
Right.
don't get food on the table. So
Right. So you got to
rather be bored and full stomach than
Right.
home and hungry.
I understand.
And the programs are so reasonable that it's much better than doing the full-time daycare.
I see what time the programs would go to. I don't see maybe I'm missing it. I don't see a start time.
So Jason, the question was, when do you think would this program start?
July 6th, Steve.
Time of the day?
Through August 14th. It's typically a
Right.
6-week program. However,
Yeah, I see
however,
July
if there's still a need for care, we
See?
could possibly extend that an additional week.
Any other questions?
I meant time.
No, I don't see a time of
I
day.
want to know what time it starts.
In the morning.
Oh, time of the morning?
Yeah.
What's the time as in,
In the morning.
was it? I forgot what it was, 8 a.m. to whatever. What was the time?
I think it's like 8 a.m. too.
So the normal program time is 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. However, in the past, we've offered some additional care, which would start at 8 o'clock a.m. and potentially go until 5 or 6 o'clock p.m. But again, that's all dependent on what the school's availability is for us to use.
And there's some logistical challenges in terms of some of the facilities have extended custodial services and some do not. So, we had talked about rather than pay the additional charge, we'll have people give a preference for which of the 3 or 4 facilities they'd be in, but we would essentially assign the extended care ones to the facilities that have the extended custodial service, so that we're not having to pay, and again, we wouldn't pay, the residents would eventually pay it. We think it would just get too costly to have to cover that. So the idea is if 2/3 of the facilities have the extended custodial care, it's typically not that high a percentage of people who take the extended time. So we would assign all the extended time people first, and then as best as possible, give everybody their first preference as to which of the 3 facilities they go to. But it'll be what it is, for lack of a better way to put it. So that's the big one we're looking at. And then, so like RHAA also had interest in potentially having a late season, assuming we can get to phase 4 soon enough. I did reach out to the school district. We got permission that they're going to follow. It's technically the RHAA fields are school property.
Okay.
The town rents the property from the school. And so I asked Andrew Whitmore to check with his folks, and we did get permission that they'll follow since it's the town rents the facilities, they'll follow our guidelines. So if we would want them to put together a plan similar to like we were talking about for tennis, or I don't know if we have badminton, but pickleball, that type of stuff. And they would put together that plan, and if it meets our requirements, then we would allow them to have a season on the facilities, on the grounds. That's kind of what we're looking at.
And that's assuming if we move to phase 4?
That's for baseball.
For any of the recreational sports, they're not part of the as I refer to it, unpause New York.
Right.
Until they get to phase 4. Now, if you look at the current schedule, if there's no setbacks, we could be in phase 4 by the end of June. If there's some setbacks, obviously that's going to be pushed back. So hopefully our residents will stay on top of things, and we'll continue to progress forward, and we'll be able to start to open some of these things up.
Okay.
Those open plans, by the way, the town has to do those as well. So as we start to, as we enter phase 4, we're going to have to put into place, how are we keeping our, DPW employees safe when they're out mowing the grass out in the public, and when they're out doing, service, and our building inspectors, what plan are we doing to keep them safe, and the whole 9 yards. So you know, we will have to put those in place and submit those as well. And again, we've got some of that started. One of the things that we've talked about is that I would like to do sooner rather than later. It's not exactly program related, but is put in a service window into the clerk's office.
From the door or?
From outside the, so off of the lobby, it's.
Gotcha.
It's the glazed glass that has the supervisor and you know, that we replace that with an actual, you know, like with a window that has a microphone in one of the pass-through drawers so that they could essentially provide service and be isolated.
Yep.
That might be a way that we can start to better expand. I mean, today when they have to do anything, they have to slide the documents under the door. That's not a good solution,
Right.
especially if you're dealing with seniors on the other side of that door.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I want us to go out and get quotes for that and see what that would cost. It would be into the passport room, which we're obviously not using because we're not doing passports inside the secure area. So, I mean, those are the kinds of types of things that people would have to put in place, you know, in terms of part of that plan. You know, obviously not everything is going to require a hardware installation, but some things do. If you look at the way they've been constantly improving the way they do the food distribution for the lunches, they now have a board that's essentially a slide board with a thing at the end. So the person pulls up next to that, the food slides down, they grab it, and away they go. So, you know, there are sometimes physical modifications that make things safer, whether it's, you know, the plexiglass guards,
right.
Stuff like that. You know, we take a look at doing all those things because again, even as we start to unpause, we're going to have these, you know, we have to make sure that if somebody comes up positive and comes to us and they're asymptomatic, we don't, you know, we want to minimize their chance of spread. So the more we can have in place in that regards, the better off we are.
I have one question. Mr. Supervisor, have we looked at, Peter's not with us anymore, God bless, but it makes me think of liability for that insurances. Have we looked at, or at least considered talking to them about what unpausing will do with our liability for things that we're going to do in the future?
Absolutely. If there's something major we're doing, we do always look at the liability aspect of it.
Right. I was going to ask a question when we talked about this.
4th of July. Yep.
Not 4th of July, I'm backing up to the summer program for the kids in the school.
Yeah, so Mike, as soon as Anita gets me what the 2 different programs look like, the specifics of them, the insurance company is waiting for those.
Okay.
For me to hand those off.
I bet they are.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, one of the things is obviously if there's an increase, if we have to add a rider for that, we would fold that into the cost of those programs.
Thank you, Linda. I was going to say your name, but I didn't want to put you on the spot.
No worries.
Some of those might be subsidized.
Right.
Or not subsidized, but in other words, that there might be some assistance we'd be able to get, including potentially some of the federal.
Extra cost.
Correct.
Okay.
But TBD.
Yep. Thank you.
So I guess in general I mean, obviously we have a lot of questions to answer, but no one sees any stop now points for that summer program. We all agree that it would be a great benefit to residents as they're starting to have to go back to work to have something in place for them to use. Again, it's not going to be as full featured as our normal, but at least it allows them to, you know, do the summer care and not have to go out and get full daycare.
And that would be open to our town residents prior to any outside town residents coming in, right?
Well,
Jason, the question was whether that daycare, it's not daycare, but that
Cub care.
I've been calling it cub care because that's what the school district calls it, whether we'll use the same, we probably won't use the exact same term to avoid confusion between the two, but I'll call it Cub 2.0, Care, I don't know, Cub Prime. That Mike asked the question, is that only available to town residents, or if it's available to non-residents, do town residents get to sign up first? How would that work?
In the past, we did allow non-residents to register for the program. However, given the circumstances, we could consider leaving this for Rush Henrietta School District children only. That's definitely something that we could think about and discuss. Since there are limited spaces, we're looking at about 60 children max per building.
Right. So if we did 3 buildings, it's obviously 180 students.
Just something I'd like to look into to make sure that.
Okay. So maybe what we do is, you know, have either sign up or that the people, non-residents can get on a waiting list. And when the sign up period ends, if there's available space, they can get on. I don't know. We'll take a look at something along those lines to preserve the spaces for residents' need. We make it pretty clear based off of past participation. I'd find it surprising if we didn't, for lack of a better way to put it, sell out with residents only. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
We rescheduled our summer registration. Resident registration will begin May 25th. I'm sorry, May 26th. It's a Tuesday, day after Memorial Day. And then non-resident registration would begin Tuesday, June 2nd.
Okay, so we did prioritize.
Well, we do that for our normal programs anyways. I'm talking about, we do something, as we discussed even further for the Cub-like care. That we basically say non-residents can sign up, but you're on a waiting list and it's on a space available basis that residents get priority. Or again, whether it's residents or because it's being done in conjunction with the school district, it would be school, so anyone in the school district or in the town.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on that? Okay, so one of the things, we've been talking about is the 4th of July. And I had suggested that there would be a huge benefit to the psyche of the town if there were some way we were able to hold a 4th of July event. Again, in theory, we could be at phase 4 where some of that can happen. I'll be surprised if we certainly know it can't happen per normal. So in other words, we're already looking at, okay, we're going to cancel all of the, the vendors and all the booths and all that stuff. And, so that we're not having a large social gathering. But the discussion of the 4th of July was, we were brainstorming is how could we do this in a social distancing manner? And one thought was we move the launch site to the top of the hill and we go only with the larger 6-inch mortars so that they're higher up in the sky. We close off the park. I would barricade all the bridges in, as I refer to it. Red Creek would become the moat, can't cross the moat. And we would actually use snow fence around the rest of the park to block off access coming in, because we wouldn't want anyone into the park for 2 reasons. 1, I don't want the social gathering there, but 2, because the fireworks are now right smack dab in the center of the park. And with the 6-inch mortar, there are very few locations within the park that wouldn't be seeing shell fallout. So, then the idea is we would have people park in their cars and stay with their cars, either in their cars or maybe in lawn chairs right in front of their cars, but that's how we would handle the social distancing. We would use all of our parking lots as well as reaching out to surrounding businesses and organizations. So like the Dome, the VA, you know, potentially Wegmans, folks like that, to see if we could use their parking lots as well. We would close off Calkins Road. We'd bring the folks in, and then we would clear them out. We had a discussion with the sheriffs, and the sheriff was in support of it if we can do it. Now, one of the things I talked to the governor's office as well. Vinny Esposito from Empire State Development, that they're kind of the folks who are handling the Pause New York stuff. They said there's probably 100 towns throughout New York who are looking at something similar. So he knows the governor's aware of it, and he's going to be thinking about, you know, is there a way to potentially do it? So, I mean, if the governor says no, then it's not going to happen. If the governor says yes, then it's up to us. One of my plans is to bring this up at the conference of town supervisors, because I certainly wouldn't want to be the only town in the county doing it, or else we're going to be inundated.
Is that Friday that you have those meetings?
There's an 11 o'clock call, Tuesdays, Thursdays, I think. The county calls are Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Okay, all right.
So the supervisor calls are off the other day. So I'm pretty sure Monday, Wednesday, Friday is county, and Tuesday, Thursday is a supervisor. We've had, you know, Adam Bello or Dr. Mendoza on the town calls, but that's when we, you know, picked which day we were going to do so that was a Tuesday when we decided we were going to do the distribution on Friday. Or excuse me, on Saturday. So like I said, I know Arundecoit was considering it. I don't know if any of the other towns are, but it would be, I realize all the towns can't do it. But, you know, for the towns that could, it would be nice to have a few of them so that we're not inundated. The sheriff had a good suggestion as a potential backup for people coming in from out, would be the using the Marketplace Mall as for essentially secondary. One of the things we've talked about is enlisting the help of a radio station, because then we could even do traffic flow discussions in terms of, you know, basically saying, okay, the Dome Arena lot is full, you know, avoid this area, you know, that type of stuff. The sheriffs think that would be awesome if we could do that. They said that would help tremendously. And then the reason we were looking at that initially, and when I then brought up the traffic flow standpoint, and part of why we're looking at that is, as you know, we normally broadcast music for the show. The idea is we would broadcast that over the radio station, and then I'd want the radio station to have some kind of programming on ahead of time. So because you know, people will get there early, as we saw from the masks, so that people who get there early have something to listen to, and so they're not bored and wandering. You know, I don't know whether this is going to happen. I don't know how people feel about whether it should happen. There's obviously a concern from a risk of contagion standpoint and a risk of problems. You know, the biggest problem, seeing as you see online, there are some people who are very adamant about being protective and safe and hunkering down, and there are people who are the exact opposite. And our fear is that the two groups meet. There's a group of people who don't give a damn, all maskless, high-fiving, walking around on the front lawn of somebody who is very concerned. And how do we deal with that? In terms of the first responders, again, the sheriffs are committed to coming up with a way to make it work. Obviously, if they find out that they can't work, they'll let us know, and then we won't do it. The ambulance said they can absolutely have the service. We would probably have a BLS located at the road entrance to the park in the event that something goes wrong with the fireworks themselves. But otherwise, their ALS or BLS could handle from their facility right on Calkins Road, especially since that road, since most of Calkins would be closed down with the sheriff. I did discuss with the sheriff about the idea of them patrolling up and down the road, because my thought is the presence of a sheriff might keep the stuff in line and calm. You know, one of the things to keep in mind is that compliance with the executive order is effectively voluntary. There is no criminal code or even civil code that they can, if somebody is violating the social distancing rules, there's nothing a sheriff can actually hit them with legally. They can ask them not to, they can do some stuff. You know, there are certain things that, you know, with some building codes and some other stuff that you can get folks on, but not in terms of if people are assembling. You don't have a right to stop that.
Right.
And so, you know, one of the things the governor talks about, and he doesn't mean this from the legal standpoint, he talked about wanting to avoid, he called them attractive nuisances. And he wasn't, again, referring to the legal term for that, but he just meant, you know, would something like this encourage people to get together and violate social distancing? My thought is that we have a big, literally a media campaign. We do it online, and I think it would easily make news. And we get with the news programs and we say, look, if we want to really start to recover from this stuff, people have to participate. This is a good opportunity to prove that we can do stuff responsibly, still be safe, and start to relax some of the stuff. How well will that work? Depends on where you stand on your view of humanity. So, you know, I don't know whether this is going to go through. I'd still like to, again, continue to pursue it and look into it and see if there is a way that we can all get comfortable. Obviously, it's a board decision, or to me, obviously, anyway.
Yeah.
It's a board decision. So ultimately, as we, you know, again, as of right now, the answer is no, because it's not allowed under the executive order. So we're not going to violate that executive order. One of the things I pointed out to Vinny is I said, well, if the governor's thinking about it, he needs to think sooner rather than later, because right now the preparation of the munitions from the fireworks company is not considered an essential service. So they are not working. They're all laid off.
Yeah.
So we would need to have him offer guidance that any fireworks company making fireworks for an approved 4th of July event can proceed. If he waits till June 20th to give that go ahead, it's not going to happen, obviously. Yeah. So at some point, there's going to be a go, no go point that if the governor hasn't said yes, then it's a hard no. Young Explosives did come out and look. They did think that the plan that Jason and I and Jason's team put together could work from the mortars. They thought that, you know, they would basically get rid of all ground effects and they would use only the higher altitude mortars so that it's viewable from a distance. We figure in addition to the local places, there would be parking spaces. I'd reach out to Rich Lefroy to use parking spaces up on top of Methodist Hill. And, you know, we try to identify a few other places, you know, but that's what we're looking at. So I'm open for comments. If you think I'm nuts for even trying this, or.
We thought you were nuts before this, Steve.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
But go ahead, Michael.
Did Young Explosives give us a May 15th deadline to tell them either way? Or did we get that extended?
So we already discussed that with them. You know, we basically made it clear that we're not doing any of the ground stuff. So they're very much aware on this, and they'll give us when they have to know a go, no go. But in other words, we're all set in that regards, that if this doesn't happen, we're not paying for the normal thing. In other words, in that regard. So we've already given them the answer. We're not doing the normal event.
Right.
And they're interested enough in potentially pursuing this that they're willing to work with us and say, here's when we have to know by. So, you know, we've also looked at, we normally spend 20K, you know, I've asked them also for a 15 and a 10K version, because one of the things to keep in mind, we're not going to see any vendor revenue like we normally do on the forest. So anything we do here will be a pure expense.
Yeah.
But again, I think from a social, from a community psyche standpoint, I think it's worthwhile for the community. I think it would go a long way, you know, for people who have been cooped up for months to a little bit of normalcy, even if it's not a normal display. To have that 4th of July display, I think would be a big benefit. The question is it possible to do it safely?
Right.
That's the big question.
Well, Millie, you can weigh in now. Oh, wait.
I guess that would just be my concern is it possible to do it safely? I mean, I think it's great. It would be a great thing if we could. I have a hard time seeing, you know, how long it takes to have a family sitting in a car waiting for the fireworks to go off and having everybody just stay in their car for an hour. I have a hard time seeing that.
Right. So, you know, again, would they need to stay in the car, or could they get their chairs out, have a pocket of chairs that are more than 6 feet away from any of the other pockets of chairs? When you think about it from the, you know, the parking spaces themselves are 9 to 10 feet. So if you're basically right in the front of your middle of your car or at the back end of your car, by definition, you've got that 6 foot separation.
Yeah.
So, you know, the issue will be, will people try to creep up and get closer to see a better view?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we discourage that?
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that sheriffs also talked about is if they did this, they would have their quad there and potentially even mounted if the horses are out of quarantine. That they, you know, so that they had foot capability to be able to respond should there be any issues in one of the parking lots or that type of stuff. So again, they're looking at ways that they can better respond to make this possible, but there's no question that's a concern.
Yeah.
Lisa, did Lisa want to weigh in before I go?
I think it would be awesome if we could do it. I mean, I think it would be really important. It's always been an intricate part of Henrietta, and people have always talked about them. But I do see the point, can people social distance? So if we can do it safely, I think it's awesome.
Personally, I love fireworks. I go all the time. I don't miss it. However, with our budget being the way it is, be honest with you, you're going to punish me, like not let me really enjoy the fireworks the way I want to enjoy them. I'd rather save the money, but that's me. That's my concern. But we'll see what the governor says.
Right.
Go
ahead.
I've already expressed some concerns to Steve to begin with. And the other thing that I really think would be important is, and will be very difficult to tell until the governor says yes or no, how many other communities will or will not have the fireworks? Because if there's only one other community having fireworks, we're going to get all the other towns,
right?
And that could cause some real issues. So that's
and we saw that on Saturday when they ran out of the masks at other towns. They were sending everybody to our town.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, really?
Perfect example. Yes.
Right.
So you're right. I mean, absolutely. If they want to go see fireworks and we're the only thing out there, they're gonna.
We're the only show in town.
We saw that on the ramp up, as we were one of the last ones to still offer marriage certificates and or marriage licenses and passports, and we had to shut down, not because we couldn't handle our own resident business, but suddenly everybody from across the county was coming.
Right.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, that to be honest is my biggest concern. You know, I said to Mike, I said, it's simple. We'll just block all the roads coming into town.
Yeah.
And we become a police town. I wish you can't You can't do that.
I know, I'm joking. There's way too.
Yeah, no, I know. I get it. I mean, it's the
Right,
citizens are paying for it and,
right.
but unfortunately there's,
Yep.
I don't really want to get into a situation either where we're policing people.
Right.
You know,
So one of the things we could do potentially as we get from a parking lot, whereas we couldn't keep people from coming in town, in terms of those inner lots, we could send out to all of our residents something. And that if you don't have one of those, you can't come into the closed off area in your car, so there are a couple ways to help with that in some extent. But again, there'll still be people who will be parked along the sides of the roads, who will be parked in some of the outer spaces potentially to see it.
Yeah. Which is another issue.
Yep.
So,
all right, well, you're going to let us know when the,
As we get any updates,
We'll be listening.
it's going to be a while before we can have a go, no go decision. Again, there's a lot more things that can make it a no than can make it a go. Everything has to go just right for it to be a go.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's worthwhile exploring it because of the huge benefit we can have. I don't know that we're going to be able to do it, but I'd at least like to see if we can. Any other questions on that?
no, sir.
no, thank you.
no.
Okay, Jason, I'm going to hang up. Budget transfers, Linda.
It's not truly a budget transfer, but in order that I dot my i's and cross my t's for our wonderful friends, the auditors, there were a couple of POs that were encumbered under what used to be the Parks Department last year. The goods didn't come in until January of this year. And when you close the books, the encumbrances go back to that department. If you remember, we created building and grounds maintenance. All I'm doing is moving the encumbrance over to the new department.
Okay. And then personnel items?
We have two, Chuck had posted quite some time ago for an additional person, actually to the buildings and grounds department, which was in the budget. They have decided on a hire for that. And we had a part-time IT person working help desk and some other stuff for Andrew, but he's not been here in well over a month. I don't know if Andrew can confirm the timing. And all of this has been kind of sitting on Andrew's head and shoulders. So we found a temporary person to work through the summer to start taking a portion of this workload, which was intended with our prior person.
Yeah, the prior person is basically, I won't go into why they're out, but they're currently not available to work.
Right.
So the idea is this will get us through that period, hopefully, and the prior person at the end of the summer will be able to come back to work and
correct,
cover ourselves.
Gotcha.
And maybe we'll have a fire marshal too.
We are working on that.
I know.
Day and night, we are working on it.
Hey, Chad, nice to see you.
Just go to the civil service.
What was that? The civil service list is almost exhausted.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
And then Mike, you're on for bills payable.
I'll be here.
Anything else?
No, sir.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Oh, so remember, we're going to adjourn to executive session.
Yes.
All right, so do you want me to come in for that?
Actually, you know what? Maybe if you want to come in, you can, or I can just call you back on the phone.
I mean, it takes me about 7 minutes to get there, so by the time.
Okay, that's fine. You can come in.
That would give me time for a much needed little break.
Okay,
Okay.
why don't we do that?
All right, I'll come in.
So can I get a motion to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Seconded.
Gee, I just noticed I missed that. It wasn't on the agenda, was it?
That's okay.
No.
Sorry about that. So it's an executive session to discuss employment.
Yep, we got an email about it.
All right, I'll get in the car. I'll be there.
All right.
Thanks,
Don't break
Lisa.
any speeding laws, okay? You
I
can't get here in 7
won't.
minutes from where you are, I can tell you
I
that.
won't.
So, yeah, with that, hearing no objections, we will now,
Can I ask a question of Don?
sure.
The meeting is still technically open, but they're going into executive session. Do I keep this Zoom meeting running without these guys sitting right there, Don?
Say we will conduct no business after the, or after the executive session.
Yeah, there's two ways you can do it. You can right now take the position that when you come back from executive session, you're just going to close the meeting and you're not going to do anything. I think that's reasonable given the circumstances. Technically, in other, in the regular world, when we didn't have the pandemic and virtual meetings, you would leave the meeting open. You would come back and close it. People would still be there, waiting, theoretically waiting for you to close it. So,
Not if they've ever been sitting through one of our other executive sessions.
Yeah. So, if I don't think it's unreasonable to take the position that, to advise the public now that you're not going to be conducting any meeting after any business after the public meeting. If you really want to, you could turn the video back on and show everybody voting to close the meeting once you're done with the executive session. That's an option.
I got you.
I would rather just post when the meeting adjourned. I think it's silly to have anybody sitting around because it's boring enough when you're sitting here. It's even worse when you're sitting watching a screen waiting to go. So,
Yep. Makes sense.
So like I said, we'll just have the executive session discussion, at which point we will adjourn the meeting.
Sounds good.
See you later, Don.
Good luck.
Okay, so Becky, please end the meeting and kill the feed.
All right, that was my only question. That's a wrap, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your support, Becky.